Welcome, folks. Welcome to the anti-broadcast on this Friday night, the 2nd of August. Woo-wee, that flew in for me. Did it for you guys. Over there we have Morgan.
Hello.
I can't even remember my own name.
That's okay.
And I'm your host, Howard. Sorry, I'm just a little bit nervous, man. We're going to talk to Nicholas Santo tonight.
Yeah. I don't know if we should introduce Nicholas or let Nicholas introduce himself. I'm never sure of what's the best way to go. But yeah, I don't think it's fair for people to introduce themselves. It's like, how do you actually introduce yourself, really? It's
really, and, you know, if you're doing a lot of interviews, you're probably going to be sick of it, you know?
Yeah.
Let's be honest. So, yeah, we can, give him his, sorry, I'm still nervous.
That's okay. You'll be fine. We'll be absolutely fine.
Yeah, we will.
He's, only half Iranian. So there's very little chance of getting blown up. So Nicholas is a comedian, to start with, so of Italian and Iranian extraction. I'm not sure which half is which, if his father was Iranian or his mother, or who's Italian, who's Iranian. But it's it's an interesting mix to begin with. Like, so Italian and Iranian, obviously you have the divide between Catholicism and Islam. So that's interesting. I imagine, I only imagine, I don't really know if both parents were Catholic or one was a Muslim and then converted, so we can find that out. But Nicholas is known for his conservative and Christian viewpoints, which is rare in comedy, because I think probably 99% of modern day comedians would be left-leaning at this stage. So it's a rarity to have somebody as a right-wing or a conservative comedian. And I think the general understanding around anybody with any kind of conservative views is that humor isn't within anybody who has a conservative take on things. But that's obviously wrong, because what's funny is funny. But what's interesting about Nicholas, especially as we find things today, that he's an immigrant to the UK. So he would seem almost an ideal fit to be a very successful comedian in the UK in regards to television and especially the BBC, and he previously worked in the BBC as a news correspondent for all things Persian. So I think that's enough of an introduction to begin with. So all we really need to know is that Nicholas is a very good comedian of Italian-Iranian extraction. And we'll wrangle the rest of the details out as we talk. And we'll cover a lot tonight. I think there's a lot going on. And thankfully, there's no shortage of current events happening in the UK and in Ireland. So we can touch on those along the way, I think.
Oh, wait, jeez, my microphone moved. Oh, sorry.
Jesus, man, you need to take some sort of fucking medication. Ambien there with your take 2 or 3. Maybe.
Oh God. The mute button is on the microphone, and it's a whole big mess. Yeah, he's an interesting confluence of different things. Not least his nationalities and his life experience. One thing that should be mentioned is he's also a family man. He has a wife and children. I mean, that's add that to his accomplishments in life, I'd say.
I know it's not difficult to pull off. Really.
Oh no, but
for the most to remain in the same building, it's a rarity these days. And for him to be present, and of course that brings up problems with being a fucking comedian as well, because you have to travel, to be successful in that game. So I'm sure that causes pressures as well. But yeah, it's a big thing these days, especially as everybody's being pushed in the direction not to have children. It's possibly one of the worst things you could do now as a man. You need to save the planet. You don't want to oppress women by putting them through the horrors of pregnancy and having to raise children. And we do have an influx of foreigners coming into every country in Western Europe, and they are having children en masse, which is very odd, really, because we've been told for the last 20 years not to have children to save the planet. However, there's currently a population crisis where we need more people. But whatever you do, don't have children. Like God forbid. Like there seems to be an easy out to this particular problem, and that gives rise to questions around replacement. I don't want to call it a conspiracy, because once you call it a conspiracy, then you have to get into kind of defending a conspiracy. Is it a conspiracy? Isn't it a conspiracy? It doesn't really matter. It's fucking happening anyway. So we can certainly talk about that. It's not something that you're going to hear people talk about in any mainstream way, other than to be ridiculed and to have a tinfoil crown put on your head and say you're absolutely fucking insane. But it can't be denied. It is happening either by design or accidentally, but there is population replacement. Even to say the replacement, it makes it sound sinister. Of course it is. But like I said, even if we look at it accidentally, it is happening. And the only way to resolve it is for Whitey to start having children. But many people don't want to, because it seems it's all too fucking terrifying. Well, we know how to do it.
One sec there.
Why would you?
Let's bring him in now.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. Oh, hey, Nicholas. How's it going?
Hello, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yeah, I can hear you. Oh, we can see you too. You have the disadvantage of not being able to see how handsome I am. So apologies for that.
It's all right. Maybe next time.
Maybe, absolutely. Yeah, we just gave you an introduction, so you don't have to go through the horrors of introducing yourself and, hi, my name is Nicholas, I'm this and I'm that. So we were initially talking. Say again, sorry?
I said I appreciate it.
No problem. I'm sure you're tired of having to do it so many times on so many different interviews and podcasts and what have you.
Well, I'm not so popular yet, but thanks.
Oh, well, you're far more popular than we are, so you can take that. We were discussing your kind of background, the Italian and Iranian. So is it a case your mother was Iranian or father is Italian? What's the makeup on that?
Well, actually, they were both Iranian, but I was born in Italy, so I was Italian, essentially.
Okay. And so they're both Christians, I take it, yeah? They didn't convert from Islam to Christianity, or what was the deal there?
No, I mean, they were Muslims, but not really practicing, that kind of Muslim.
Sure.
I myself, probably because, of course, being raised in Italy, and then spending a few years in Iran during my high school years, then compared and contrasted the two, and decided I was more, leaning towards Christianity. So yeah, I mean, technically I haven't been baptized, but my wife is a Catholic, and my kids, I've baptized them, and they go to Catholic school. So that's basically my story.
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I would have thought that maybe your father or mother was a Catholic or Christian. So your schooling you went through Islamic schooling, was it? Or how did that work?
I kind of had to, because my father was a diplomat with the Iranian embassy in Rome. So I had to go through school, through the Iranian school system. And then for my high school years, they actually moved back to Iran, which was exactly not what I would have wanted, for obvious reasons. And then once I was done there, I returned to Italy on my own.
Okay. And so did you have any issue in Iran having those thoughts around Christianity, or is it just it's not an issue? It's just you it doesn't come up in general conversation, or?
Well, I would, yeah. Well, that it's a major risk. Obviously, people risk far more for saying far less. So apostasy, that's the technical term, isn't it? Is punishable by death. So essentially, in Iran, among other things, if you are a convert, or even if you are not a convert, but you just express, doubts over the tenets of Islam, or, commit blasphemy, you risk a lot. So And of course, not just that, but in a wide range of topics, you have to constantly watch yourself, watch your tongue, and watch your back. And of course, with close friends and family, maybe sometimes you have debates and all that, but you have to be very, very careful. Um, that's well, in a way, it was a formative experience and also motivating, because then I came back to the Christian West, and sometimes I joke and I say, ironically, I was maybe it was easier to defend Christianity in Iran than in the West, right?
Yeah,
Or
sure.
criticize Islam in Iran than in the West, which is not exactly true, but just to give the idea that
Hmm.
how far we have deteriorated in terms of freedom of speech and the defense of Christian or Western values.
Yeah.
Can
So
I?
with Christianity, would you kind of just classify yourself as kind of an a la carte Christian? Like, is it do you have a deep Christian faith, or it's more kind of a cultural expression?
Um, that's a good question. I mean, I wouldn't call it a la carte, because I haven't done, or I wouldn't go about it mixing and matching, like like a buffet concept, right?
Sure.
If that's what you mean. It's interesting. A while ago, I don't know if you heard this story, but here in London, the uber woke mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, had kind of, or basically his office had kind of forgotten about Easter, because
Oh,
Easter and Ramadan had coincided, and therefore in the very center of London, in Regent Street, Oxford Street, which are quite famous for the light decorations for Christmas or other occasions, there was a massive display of decorative lights for the month of Ramadan, and then suddenly they remembered, oh, oops, it's also Easter. So how about we change them? Or I don't know if they changed it or they opted for something which was, of course, a last minute thought, so it wasn't as grand as the Ramadan thing. And long story short, Richard Dawkins came out on Twitter or X and said something, I'm paraphrasing, like, I'm an atheist, but even this is too much, or, the values of Christianity, or, the traditional Christianity and all that. And then some people criticized him and said, look, you dismantled Christianity and you relegated it just to, a bunch of, how can I say it? Touristy cultural traditions, if you like, and now you
mhm.
can't complain that it's being overtaken and it's being forgotten. So I don't know if I went off a tangent on your
No,
question,
you're in
but
good company.
thank you. So my point is, I may not be practicing in terms of having fish on Fridays, or going regular to church and all that. But in terms of the value system, the pro-life angle, um, and the sanctity of life, and the fact that I believe this is a religion that needs to be given um, primary consideration and status in our country. And maybe I didn't believe that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, but look where we are going in the whole Europe, as I'm sure you are aware. So yeah, I'm very much in line, but because I didn't go through that sort of classic Catholic schooling, I don't know everything or every detail, the technicalities maybe, but value-wise, I'd say I see myself in line with Christianity and the Catholic religion.
Yeah, it's pretty much for us in Ireland. 95% of us will go through the formal Catholicism, which leaves you no better off. You come
Hmm.
out of 12 years of schooling and you have very little understanding of Christianity anyway. So it's not really that much of an advantage. But with you finding Christianity, and I'd probably call it cultural Christianity, that's where I think I find myself as well. Does that come after you have a family, or does that kind of come into your mindset before that?
I think it was before that. Uh, I when I returned to Italy, it was a few days before September 11th, which of course gave all of us a lot of food for thought, right? And I remember I was watching a lot of TV debates, and maybe thankfully, because places like Italy are a bit more backward in terms of not having been indoctrinated by the woke left, by the globalist left, as much as Northern Europeans, right? Everything, all this poison that is being put into our minds and thoughts in places like Britain, in America, of course, it all starts in America, right? The whole, we were behind in Italy, and thank God for that. So maybe people were openly debating stuff, the clash of civilization, the clash of religions, the question of compatibility of Islam. And I remember then Prime Minister Berlusconi came out and said, look, there's no doubt that the Western civilization is superior to the Islamic civilization. But he was the first Trump, right? Saying things as everybody thought, or most people thought. And he was popular for that. And no surprise there. So, and there was this Italian professor on TV. His name was Massimo Cacciari. And ironically, I think he's more left-leaning or liberal-leaning, but left or liberal in the more noble sense of the term, not the current crazy left.
Sure.
And he said something on air that struck me, and I to this day I remember that, comparing the religion. And he said, ultimately, I love Christianity and I defend Christianity because it's a religion where God has turned himself into man and has come to the earth as a man. That's how important he sees the man, and that's how much he loves the man, as opposed to another religion who would constantly want to punish the man and look for excuses to send him to hell, or wage holy wars and all that. And then when you think about it, ultimately the whole concept of human rights comes from Christianity, unlike what others might want to tell us. And that the detractors of Christianity say Europe woke up and rose up and went towards enlightenment when they got rid of Christianity. But actually, I think human rights are rooted in Christianity because God created humans in his image and likeness, which means if a creature is created in a divine image and likeness, then he deserves respect, right? It's no coincidence that the concept of human rights and all these values and freedoms originated in the Christian West, right? So that's where I stood, and this was shortly after 9/11, and of course I had just come back from the Middle East, and unsurprisingly going to university in a very leftist environment, but having conservative sympathies and hanging out with conservative friends. So these ideas were already pretty much in my head. And then I started my own family maybe a decade later.
Okay, interesting. With Christianity, I don't know, the UK seems pretty secular to me. It always has for the last, maybe 20 years. It's like Christianity almost became a slur. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking of young guys, say anybody under the age of 20, especially here in Ireland as well, after we had the kind of scandals with the Catholic Church. and paedophilia, there was a massive campaign. People just turned away from the church altogether. Now, when you actually look at it in detail, I don't think there was any more prevalence of paedophilia in the Catholic Church than there is in the teaching profession or any other profession for that matter. But it massively turned people off Christianity and the spiritual life. And then I think wokeness kind of filled that gap. Salman Rushdie said everybody has a God-shaped hole that needs to be filled, and people have kind of gravitated towards wokeness in some way, shape, or form. But the worry for me is that, especially for young guys, that they will be drawn to Islam, because as far as I can tell from Islam, it seems more focused on power versus kind of the love of Christianity. And we have guys like Andrew Tate who come to the fore, and he seems to have the mind of young guys. So I just have this sneaking suspicion that young guys who are looking for an answer or an antidote to wokeness will be drawn to Islam, but have no real understanding of what Islam actually is. And especially for people on the left as well, it seems the most bizarre thing I've ever seen is where they have this, it's like they've joined forces with Islam and wokeness. And it seems very, very strange how these two things could work together. But then I look at Iran, and looking at the Iranian Revolution, where kind of communists joined forces with the mullahs in Iran, and then as soon as the revolution was complete, the first people they turned on was the left. So do you think there's a possibility that this will happen in the UK as well, especially given what's happened in the last couple of days? It seems that the culture war has really come to the fore now. And young guys, I think it's either going to be a case of nationalism. They'll gravitate towards nationalism again, which doesn't seem to have any real stronghold in the UK from what I can see. And then the only other real option left will be Islam, if a Western face can be put on Islam.
I agree. You're absolutely right. This unholy alliance between the left and Islam, which can be contradictory, right? But we've all seen gays for Gaza and feminists for hijab, and it's been going on for years. Sometimes maybe it hasn't been in the media spotlight because the stories maybe haven't been local, or Western. But as you mentioned, in Iran, it totally happened. The hatred of the left towards Western culture, Christianity, or the West, we can decide what to call it, or sometimes we call it colonialism, imperialism. These safe-hating, West-hating leftists have so much hate that they would coalesce with any other force, in this case Islam, to bring down the current order and the Western civilization. Well, what happened in Iran was that these communists and other socialists or lefties, and some people who were maybe genuinely but naively interested in a Western-style democracy, they decided to bring down the monarchy, which was not perfect, but it was the most, ironically, the most progressive and benevolent governing force that country had experienced for decades, if not centuries, actually. And the results are before the eyes of all of us. The whole Middle East is burning because that, malicious Islamic. Basically, the leftists thought, these stupid mullahs and Islamic clerics, they cannot rule. We just use them because the masses haven't written Karl Marx. The masses have read the Quran. They haven't read Karl Marx, right? So we think we use them to pave the way for us to then come to power. But in reality, what happened was the opposite. The clerical forces used these ones to come to power, and then send them to death squads, and the remainder of them are now in exile in Britain and Germany. They went to West Germany. No surprise there, although they were lefties. None of them chose to go to the East Germany or North Korea or the Soviet Union. So here we have the same pattern, and again, ironically, we see the left has sacrificed or abandoned its traditional electorate or its traditional target, be it women, be it the working class. You saw it with Brexit, right? Because the working class was tired of being, shunned and derided and ignored, so they voted for Brexit. A third of the Labour Party electorate voted for Brexit because they were tired of that. Because of wokeism and intersectionality, they have decided that, okay, um, maybe Hamas or the majority of Palestinians are against gays, but they're also brown. So in that category of victimhood, a wife-beating man who is white is evil, but a wife-beating man who is brown, so also a victim of colonialism or imperialism, you name it, is an ally, and we need to look at them maybe more favorably and with mitigating factors. So that's one problem. You mentioned the events of the recent days, but this has been happening. All this. This is not the first, terrorist attack we've had. We've had the grooming scandals for years, for decades. They turned a blind eye to that because they didn't want to embarrass, their Islamic allies, and they saw the whole thing in a narrative of, we need diversity, we need multiculturalism, we need more immigration, because they want to bring down that Christian Western order, right? So that's one problem, and of course, open borders, be it here, be it in America, be it in Ireland. you guys are more recent, but with a lot of viciousness and maybe higher scale, because Ireland has a smaller population, of course. You're experiencing this as well. They are importing their future voters. So in a way, this could be a repeat of that Iranian scenario, that they think, okay, we bring in these Muslims, so they will vote for us, but then be careful what you wish for. At one point, the Muslims might have their own party, and go for an Islamic government. So that's the question of the unholy alliance between these two forces. The other question is, as you mentioned, the fascination or the charm of Islam, because when Christianity, on the one hand, has been systematically degraded and ridiculed and marginalized and criminalized, empty churches, media, education system, maybe not in Ireland, but here, stand-up comedy, you name it. It has been relegated to the margin. On the other side, we have a vibrant religion, numbers increasing, because it is powerful, and it's not about, people are drawn to power, to values as well, because again, people need values, people need family. If you have men which might be disillusioned with feminism and the constant assault on the nuclear family, and then you have women who have been given false promises by feminism and realize that maybe we were sold a lie. So what is the alternative? Then they have something like Islam, which promotes family. This is the Andrew Tate part as well, right? Traditional roles, traditional family roles in the family, or gender roles. So that is also a problem, where Islam, of course, and it is an openly proselytizing religion. I think that's the word, right? They're openly hell-bent on recruiting people, and it's so easy to become a Muslim. And of course, they also have the institutions or the propaganda, the media, everything behind them. So yes, it is a concern.
Yeah, it's a big concern. And I don't know the antidote to it. You kind of talk to, like, people in Ireland know very little about Islam at all. They you tell people that, you mentioned Aisha, Muhammad and Aisha, and that Aisha was 6 when she married to Muhammad and 9 when you had intercourse, and people think you're making it up, So like that for me, that should be the big warning to begin with, where this example for men for all time is actually a paedophile, and people try to justify, they were different times, but they never seem to make the connection that, okay, well, what kind of God would send a paedophile as a prophet? So to have that conversation in Ireland is absolutely fucking shocking. And what's a mystery for me is that the people, like, for men, it would actually be great. I think a lot of young guys would be happy. It's like, okay, well, now I don't need to be afraid to approach women anymore. You can essentially just take what you want, have 4 wives if you can afford it. It's really an attractive proposition for young guys. And I just don't see how Christianity can compete with that. At least the version of Christianity we have, which at least in Ireland, it's weak. There's no power of it. It's one of continuous forgiveness, of turning the other cheek. There seems to be no kind of antidote to this attraction to power. So I'm not sure if Christianity can, at least in its current form, can compete with that, without us reverting back to some sort of violence. And that's all that seems to be working in Ireland at the moment as well, especially around immigration. Like you said, for us, it's fairly new. We have a history of emigrating, hundreds of years of we travelled here, we travelled there. And that's been used against Irish people to silence them, that, how dare you criticize immigration when your forefathers travelled to the 4 corners of the earth. Yeah, and the answer to that is, well, so fucking what? Like, I didn't leave. I have to stay. I'm still here. My children are here. I don't want them to leave. And it's a terrible excuse to shut people down, that, okay, because your ancestors, left, therefore we must accept everybody into the country and have no say in the matter at all. So I think everybody's kind of scratching their head for a solution that doesn't involve some level of violence. Like I said, the only thing that's keeping immigration centres being built in Ireland is people burning buildings, buildings down to the ground. That essentially happened because back in November of last year, we had a stabbing outside a creche where a Muslim guy, an Algerian guy in his, I think, late 50s, he went to a creche, stabbed 3 or 4 children. I think one of the children died. And then everything just went to shit. Half of Dublin was burned to the ground. And of course, the next day, the narrative is, well, this is because of far-right hate. No mention about the children being stabbed, how horrible that is, that the guy was a Muslim. Is there some sort of connection here to this culture and this kind of act? And then we see the same thing repeated in the UK a few days ago. And of course, it's shocking. And again, the standard response from your government, at least the Labour government, again, seems to be, okay, well, this is a problem of the far right. We need to introduce emergency legislation, increase, it's almost like pre-crime, where they're going to track people now with conservative views, the introduction of facial recognition systems as well. So it seems like we're on this kind of dystopian track. It's almost like a science fiction fucking novel.
Like Minority Report, isn't it?
Pretty much like.
They've been waiting for this for ages. The government is all about control, and the Labour Party and the leftist side, of course, more than anyone, and ever since COVID, but even before COVID, they just one of the major risks and concerns about the whole lockdowns was that once they learn that they can do this, then they can do this all the time and for all sorts of reasons, right? Yeah, we can lock people down. And in fact, they are trialing the so-called 15-minute cities in Cambridge and in Oxford, if I'm not wrong, and the script is always the same. The same people, the same political leaders, politicians, and media who justify BLM riots or Islamic terrorism, because let's look at the underlying causes and the root causes, and they do terrorism because, we did the Crusades 7 centuries ago, which we lost, by the way. In one of my jokes, I say, if they are so angry and killing girls who go to a concert, in Manchester for a war that they won, is as revenge for a war that they won, because I've been to Constantinople and it's not Christian anymore. So we lost the war, and that's the revenge. Imagine what they would do if they had lost that war. But
Sore
um,
winners.
I know, good one. Maybe I'll use that
Yes,
if you
please do.
love it. So so the script is always the same. If BLM riots, it's mostly peaceful in front of burning buildings, the classic images. And if Islamic terrorism happens, we can't even sometimes call it Islamic terrorism because it might offend somebody. But then the most innocent, the most vulnerable, the most defenseless of creatures repeatedly in Dublin or in England have been groomed or raped or murdered, and people are reacting to it, and all of a sudden that reaction, oh yeah, some bricks were thrown, and the entire cities can be burned down, and we need to be, the from the Joe Biden government, yeah, we see your passion and we hear your voice and all that rubbish, right? But then a bunch of bricks are thrown at a police car, and these people are, tearing their clothes for oh, they're burning down their own city. That this is so sad. And how about the 6-year-old victims? So this script is always the same. Try to pass the criminal as white. It is white passable. Hold on to the identity. Hold on to the picture. If the picture comes out, it's a picture of his childhood to cause maybe sympathy,
Ah.
and of course blame the so-called far right. If those people on the streets of Southport were far right would have had a landslide in the recent elections. They just have no shame. Um, so and countries who have been, and because, as you said, it's fairly new to Ireland. We have seen these, I would say, inspiring scenes where people are actually speaking up and people are even resorting to violence to stop it. Other people, places like Britain, where people for decades have been, constantly bombarded and indoctrinated and brainwashed with white guilt and colonial guilt and all that. Of course, they have been, they've become numb to it, apart from the flurry of, incidents like this, because it's so massively shocking, like 3 levels that people take to the streets. Again, ironically, you see in Eastern Europe, the populations, the government that the populations, like in Hungary or Poland, occasionally elect, or the border forces are defending Western values and Western identity and Christian values. And I say ironically because the globalist entity that is the European Union adamantly annexed and expanded to these countries, but now it has kind of backfired. So sometimes I say thank God for Eastern Europe, and thank God for Ireland, because it's a pretty bleak picture.
Yeah, I think what we have in our favour is we've historically been on the receiving end of colonialism. So that doesn't wash with Irish people, that guilt trip that people from the UK have, where, they are the colonisers, therefore how dare they say anything against their government. We don't have that, so we don't have that fear, or that we can't be shamed into using that.
They strip you with the Irish immigration, just like they do it with Italy. Like we were the immigrants and we went to America. So what? We didn't go there to do terrorism. It was a vast country. We went there legally. We were welcome. Well, first of all, we discovered America. It's named after an Italian. It was the same religion, and people perfectly integrated: Irish, German, Italian, regardless of their surnames aside, they perfectly integrated. This is their double standard. Or I say, oh well, this has been a land of immigration, like the Vikings, the Romans. Yeah, the Vikings did a lot of raping and pillaging as well. Is that okay? So the people who are all about microaggressions and no mansplaining, and equal pay for tennis players who are female, or even though they don't play as much or they don't attract as many, spectators and all that. Suddenly, they refer to Vikings and the Viking times to justify open borders. I mean, there's
It's
almost
fucking
some
crazy.
comedy streak lying there.
Yeah, and I'm sure ask a Native American what they think of mass immigration. I'm sure they'll tell you that it never works out well, for the native populations. So I suppose the question is, especially with everything that happened in the UK recently, like how does somebody make that funny? Can you work on material at the moment around something as tragic as children being murdered in a crash, or is that something you will steer absolutely clear of? It's too soon, that's the saying, isn't it, in comedy? Too soon to try to make humor or jokes out of that. But for me, comedy ultimately for me is about truth. It's kind of truth delivered at a speed that people aren't used to, and I think that's good comedy. That's what makes people laugh kind of nervously, So is that something you will approach, or just skip over that and just talk about it in a more serious tones?
It is something that I will approach, but whether or not I manage to make it funny or to think, because, well, you cannot always be positive if it's funny until you've seen the crowd's reaction, and that's the fascination and the challenge of stand-up, right? It's almost always contingent on the reaction of the crowd, on the verdict of the crowd, and you have to be brave enough to maybe take a gamble on it. I believe I'm more. I'd say I'm a free speech absolutist, and I think no topic is necessarily off the table. But by that, I don't mean I want to be a jerk. Some of these, again, you mentioned earlier the question of Catholic pedophile priests, and again, I had a little joke in there. I said, when I came to this country that is England, the number of Catholic pedo priest jokes I heard on the London comedy circuit, I thought this country had more Catholic priests than Italy, which of course is not true, but it's just an easy topic to feel good about yourself and feel brave, but disingenuously, because there's no risk. Nobody has risked anything by going after Catholic priests on the English comedy circuit. So I'm not one of those comics who just want to shock for the value of shock. It has to be funny, and it has to be it has to have a purpose. So again, without naming her, there was a little girl that went missing almost over a decade ago, and people still make jokes about her on the comedy circuit. Even some of our celebrity comics who have shows on the BBC and such. And I thought, I mean, of all topics, why are you short of topics to make things, funny? And what is the purpose? There's no social utility to make jokes, nasty jokes, crude jokes about a little girl who went missing on a holiday and is still missing, and there's still an active search finding her. So I don't think that's bravery. That's just shock for the
No.
takers.
They wouldn't have done it if the little girl was ethnic.
Probably not. Just like, as I said, they do Catholic priest jokes, but how many jokes do they do about Islam? Hardly any. And even the ones they do, it's usually tame, and it's about maybe a word play. That's the times we live in. The question of touchiness, I can tell you, my most successful routine is my pro-life routine, which I'm rather proud of. It's almost 15 minutes, with the exception at the very beginning and very end, pro-life talking points turned into jokes. And I think I managed to make them funny, but obviously, ultimately, it's the audience who can tell. And it went kind of viral, and I got a lot of interviews from overseas as well. A lot of pro-life associations in the UK and in America were interested to talk about it. It's had over 1 million views on YouTube, and I thought it was a good example of how you can treat a very unpalatable and controversial, obviously, topic into a comedy routine. Of course, you cannot do it all the time and with all the audiences. You know, if I'm doing a mainstream gig or in a mainstream club with people who are on first or second dates or are just there to have a good time, or if it's a corporate gig, or if it's, that kind of environment, people haven't come there to be
Assaulted.
yeah, well, they say assaulted.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's relative. Some people might and will appreciate it because even I did this in a very open-minded comedy event called Comedy Unleashed, which is sort of unique in the United Kingdom and one of the few places where I can get stage time and speak freely, which again tells you about the state of stand-up comedy in the West. I don't think the US or probably Ireland is any more different. But even then, some people didn't like it, and of course, I think enough people did like it. It's always you need to be tactful because then the the promoter of the night might not like it, and it's his bread and butter. So you have to. I've had promoters of a promoter of another event, which was again a free speech night, actually expressly asking me to do my pro-life routine. And I was like, oh, are you sure? Okay, if you give me the go ahead, I will do that. But then some other guys, and I have been banned because of pro-life individual jokes, never mind an entire routine. I have been banned from other clubs. So it's a bit delicate because when you go to a jazz night, you know at least you're going to watch or hear jazz. But when you go to a comedy club, you don't know if people are going to talk about dating apps or give you some pro-life jokes. But at the end of the day, I always think I didn't set out to be necessarily a right-wing conservative Christian comic, but ultimately it was going to come out because comedy has to come from a true place and it has to come from your experience, and this is who I am. Um, and of course, being banned from a bunch of clubs very early on, and some fellow comics outing me to my day job, to my daytime employer, all that vicious stuff and backlash kind of made me even, more resolved to go down this route because ultimately I thought we are at war. This is a culture war. This is a demographic war. I think the great replacement is real. And I've seen that unholy alliance that we talked about between Islam and the left can have such devastating impact. So I thought if I'm going out to do this for next to no money, I might as well do something useful socially. It has to be funny because I don't want to be just lecturing or preaching because that's danger, right? But at the end of the day, I thought to myself, and I have kids, if I'm taking time off them or being with them to go to a top basement or upstairs floor to do this for peanuts, let's do something that can also be of some social utility. And then, to be fair, it's also good for me as well because it makes me stand out. That's again our times. That was one of my jokes. And funny story. I hope you find it funny, but one of the guys who banned me from his club, not because I was pro-life in that occasion, but because I was pro-Trump. This was early Trump years, 2017 or 2018. And so I had this little joke. I would say something like, yeah, it's hard to be a right-wing comic because I have no one else whose material I can copy, right? So I would say it's good to be a right-wing comic because I'm always the funniest right-wing comic of the lineup. But it's hard because I have no one else whose material I can copy or steal. And he said, yeah, Nicholas, you were inaccurate. You implied you were the only right-wing comic in the country. But there's also Leo Kers and Andrew Lawrence. So
whole three.
three in the kingdom by his admission. Okay, let's give him 5 or even 10. But the point was valid. But I thought, if I'm getting banned and if I have to change my day job, which I had twice, as recently as last month, my second day job, and if I have to take time off my kids and family, I might as well give people something that they want. I mean, the ones who want, and I've had so many people also coming to me after these gigs in mainstream clubs, or well, not that they're big clubs, but in London, telling me, yeah, I'd never seen such a thing, or I'd never seen such a thing in recent years, and thank you. Sorry, I didn't laugh enough because I was next to my girlfriend or whatever. But yeah, and I get encouraging messages thanks to YouTube and internet from all over the world. So I think at the end of the day, incorporating these talking points into a comedy routine is challenging because obviously these are unpalatable and very hard issues. But on the other hand, it's also something to be remembered by. I say if I'm hit by the proverbial bus tomorrow, I can always say I had the only, or maybe the first pro-life stand-up routine in the world. So yeah, I will think about that.
Yeah. So, but I think that's the power of comedy, because if you can make people laugh, you can essentially say anything. And there's never been a time where these things need to be said. I would say it's a disservice to call you a conservative comedian. You're kind of the epitome of a counterculture comedian. And it's just bizarre now that the counterculture would be conservative culture. I don't think there's ever been a time in modern history where, it's always been, leftist comedy. Like you look at Lenny Bruce, guys like George Carlin, even Bill Hicks, they're the greatest comedians, especially Lenny Bruce. Like he was kicked out of every fucking club because nobody wanted to hear what he had to say. And what he had to say was essentially the truth. And that's the real danger in comedy is getting people to hear the truth. And that's why I think there's such an attack on comedians. Let's call it right-wing comedians or counterculture comedians. It's because you're essentially speaking the truth. And that's when I laugh, it's primarily, one, I'm really uncomfortable, but mostly it's because somebody has said something that's true, in a humorous way. But it's essentially, it's the truth. And I think that's the true kind of success mark of a comedian, is somebody who speaks the truth when it's particularly a dangerous time to say it. And I don't think what you're saying is that dangerous, in the sense it's actually what people need to hear. It's like, these are good values to have. I think that just shows us how fucked up the world actually is at the moment, when it's controversial for somebody to say, family life is a good thing, not killing babies is a good thing. Like how fucking crazy is it that it's a controversial topic to say you shouldn't kill life, you should value life and value people, and that true diversity is actually listening to differing point of views rather than trying to incorporate everybody into your particular fucking cult. So I think it's a real compliment that these people don't want you there, or that they're frightened, because that's what it is. And I think that's why governments want to shut people down, and especially comedians, because it's the last bastion where people can actually say controversial things is in the world of comedy. And I suppose the question I'd ask you is that what brings you into comedy? It's that way, because I know you were previously a journalist, and anyone I know who's serious about journalism, they're drawn to it because they want to talk about the truth. And it seems that's no longer available in mainstream journalism. So then the only outlet to be heard, and to be heard by many people, is the world of comedy. And I think there are very few true comedians out there. I would put you in that bracket as a true comedian. The rest of them seem to be comedic actors. And I know the comedy world, there seems to be a lot of fucking vicious people within it who would slit your throat to get a step up on the comedic ladder. But again, yeah, so the question really is that what draws you to comedy? It's a place where you can actually speak the truth and be heard. And maybe you can touch on your journalism as well, because I know the BBC, you had issues with the BBC as well.
Absolutely. We have this thing, I call it comedic license. I don't know if that's the correct term, but it's one of our last trenches. And that is the job of satire, after all. The historic figure of the court jester, because comedy gives you that license to speak truth to power and to say things that are unpalatable to king and still save your skin, be immune from his anger. So I think this is a very noble function of satire and of comedy nowadays, and that's why it's no wonder that conservative comedians or right-wing comedians or Christian comedians have become the rebels nowadays, because obviously everything else on the left is the message and the policy of the establishment. So what is rebellious there? What is rebellious about talking about climate change or gender pay gap or being in favor of open borders or LGBT and all that? These are all policies, I think, very wrong and harmful policies, openly and vehemently pursued by our governments and global governments. We are right now, one of the big talking stories, one of the big stories of the week is a essentially male boxer with male chromosomes beating the hell out of an Italian female boxer in the Olympics. So it's inevitable that if you speak truth, and if you speak truth to power, and if you want to make people think and rebel against the dominant, prevalent, prevailing doctrines and narratives, you have to be a conservative or Christian or right-wing comic. Now, I always liked comedy, not just because of this function of truth-telling or satire, but again, I spent my high school years in the Islamic Republic of Iran in a religious dictatorship, very very on. And I was very angry about it because I was born in the West and I was supposed to be there. But anyway, my parents took me at a time when everybody was getting the hell out of Iran, the other way around. But so I was always, thinking about these questions of freedom and freedom of speech, and in my high school years, again in Iran, I would listen to BBC World Service or Voice of America, which is the equivalent of BBC World Service, trying to get the news from the Free West, and then maybe 10 years, 15 years later, are working for the BBC. So that should have been or could have been the dream job for many people. But soon I realized, I'm just a cog in a machine of leftist, globalist, woke propaganda. And of course, I started in 2009, and you've seen that the whole thing and the whole wokeification and the leftist capture of institutions and the media went from bad to worse very, very quickly, right? Exponentially. So I was very much disillusioned with that. And I always thought of myself as someone creative and someone who likes to talk and likes to write and likes to report, and that was my job. But then you can't talk and report, and you constantly are clashing with your bosses because you say, "Hey, this story about Trump is unfair," and you get a disciplinary for that, and I did. Or you have to shut up because you've got a mortgage to pay, and then so it's total disenchantment, right? And that's when comedy came into play. So I was interested in comedy also from a language point of view because English was not my first language, and I'd done linguistics, and I was always fascinated by how something can be funny, or how something with a slight tweaking of the words it can be funny, and then if it's funny in different rooms, it is not equally funny. So these things have always fascinated me. But soon, as I said, it became also a vehicle for my creativity and for trying to do what I couldn't have done as a BBC journalist. And then, of course, I, I was in a very untenable situation because the more successful I became as a comedian, not that I became super successful, but any attention or recognition that I got then would create problems with me with my boss, and that's what happened when one of my routines went kind of viral, and the Spectator featured it in one of their online articles. Soon I had a call from my bosses and said, "Hey, you got to stop that," and yeah, ultimately we had to part ways. Um, but to get back to your question, um, first of all, they haven't left any other channels for us to speak, right? You can't make movies in Hollywood with I wouldn't even say necessarily Christian values, but just sane values or common sense, right? They're running their own, revered franchises one after. I've never been into Star Wars or Doctor Who, or with all due respect for people who like that kind of stuff, it wasn't my genre, right? Uh, but nobody is immune, right? I like James Bond and spy movies, and then we're gonna have a black James Bond, presumably. Good luck with him, infiltrating Kremlin, being black. Uh, but if you are a fan of video games, if you're a fan of Star Wars, if you're a fan of James Bond, Doctor Who, opera, boxing, doesn't matter what you are into, football, with the whole kneeling for Black Lives
Mm,
Matter and all
mm,
that. No matter what you are into, they are bombarding you, they are penetrating you, they are hollowing out your church, but also your beloved movies and franchises and sports and everything. So comedy is our last
mm,
trench, if at all. So which is kind of fortunate for me because I enjoy it and I try to use it as a vehicle for my creativity, and also uh, to be able to tell my maybe grandchildren one day that at least I fought the good fight
Mm.
by comedy.
Yeah, because you seemed like the ideal candidate to be a successful, quote unquote, successful comedian in the UK. You're a foreigner, you've got Italian connections, you're like maybe your skin color you weren't dark enough, like
The
uh,
right kind of foreigner.
yeah,
I tell you a story. I had a range of disciplinary cases with the BBC, but I tell you the very last one where they told me, okay, this time you get a final written warning, and if we catch you one more time, then then you're sacked. Okay, and that's when I resigned and found another job, which I had to leave later. That other job as well because they didn't like me being doing stand up and being on GB News. But this is the joke for which I had my last disciplinary case. I mean, it was a dossier of different, activities and beliefs and social media posts. But this was the joke that was the cornerstone of that whole disciplinary case. So I said something like, in this day and age, if a man wakes up and says he's a woman, we have to go along with it. And if a woman wakes up and says, I'm a man, we have to go along with it because that's how they see themselves and perceive themselves and relate to the outside world and all that. Okay. But why is that when I say I like UKIP, they tell me you are not white enough? So if this guy has a penis, he gets to be a man, but I'm not white enough to vote for UKIP. You see, and they saw this as a transphobic joke.
Oh, for
You know,
fuck's
if
sake.
anything, I was conceding the premise to them. I said, okay, I'm going along with your premise, self-identification, all right? But how come somebody with a penis is woman enough, but this complexion is not UKIP enough? You know, when you get to the bottom of it, actually, this is an anti-racism joke because all I'm saying is, you know, you are pigeonholing me because of my background. How many times have I or people like me have said this? You know, you're Italian, so you must be against Brexit. And I'm like, no, why? You know, I would have come here anyway. Like Guglielmo Marconi, the Italian inventor of radio, came to the UK, came to Britain, invented the radio. You know, okay, is it too pretentious of me to compare myself to Marconi? But why are you comparing me with the Romanian beggars? You know, with all due respect, you know, for the good, hardworking Romanians. But you know, this is actually leftist racism, which I think is the worst kind of racism. You kind of look brownish, so you must be okay with the Pakistani grooming gangs, or you know, why? Why? So yeah, they don't like that kind of foreigner. Or just like if you're black and you vote for Trump, you are a sellout, right? And here, if you're Italian but you like Brexit, again, you're weird. Or if you're an immigrant and you are not for open borders and crazy people coming to kill our kids and be on a burden on the taxpayer, then they can't fathom that.
Yeah, they don't seem to do nuance very well at all. And I think they're completely blind to their own racism. And there's a tendency to infantilize every fucking foreign guy who arrives on the shore from the left, that they're children who need to be protected and looked after. And maybe that's the thing to do with feminism, just that lack of a child or a cat. That the new pet will be a fucking West African foreigner. You know, they'll take one into the house and look after it. Going back to your, I saw that in 2019 you got to the finals of the what's the new act of the year.
Right.
Am I correct in thinking that the lady who won that, I can't remember. I think her surname is that she's an Irish surname and an African first name. But I had a look at her comedy the other day, and it's just dog shit. Like it's exactly what you said. It's just pure woke nonsense. It was just all about basically her being an African, colonialism. So that has to be the reason d'etre within the BBC. It's just they're not hiring people based on merit. It's purely that somebody who fits the narrative at the given time is given the nod, which kind of rubbishes the whole idea of a competition to begin with. Like,
Yeah, I was positively pleased to make to that final, but to this day, that is my most important, you know, competition result. I was very pleased with that. And I went to the final, and to be fair, and this was said also in different circles, she was not even a new act. She had been. This was 2019, and the competition is called New Act of the Year. I started in 2017, 2018ish, as I said, so I was new. And she won it despite having been going on for almost a decade. Some people said she
Oh,
had already been
jeez.
on BBC television. She had a CD. She had an agent. She had performed in New
Oh,
York
come on.
and all that. So much for being back. But never mind that. Yeah, the routine was all about British people being worried about racism. It's not like being worried about immigration. It's not like immigrants come here and change you to and force you to change your fish and chips and all these superficial and disingenuous talking points. right? It's enough to walk in any major English or British city, and you see the whole city has changed, especially certain neighborhoods. People, and this is such a tragedy and such a human, loss and disgrace that you walk in the streets you grew up, and you can't even read the shop signs because it's in another alphabet. You are the only white person on the bus, on the street, and I mean this is a whole European story. It's not just even British. And these people are making jokes about, yeah, nobody forced you to change your fish and chips. What are you worried about? Never mind the grooming gangs, never mind the terrorism, never mind the head choppers, born and bred British, the Beatles that we exported to Syria to join ISIS and behead other Westerners and enslave entire female populations into sexual slaves and all that. But yeah, the gatekeepers of comedy, be it the BBC or other mainstream channels, the circuit, they want that sort of narrative, and it's just an exercise in box ticking. So you go to some of these clubs, and of course I go to some of these clubs sometimes as a comic and sometimes as a punter, as a viewer, and it's comic after comic who comes on. Oh, I'm gay. Oh, I'm trans. Oh, I'm autistic, and girl after girl talking about their sexual adventures, and then the media, the reviews bill them as subversive. So what is she subverting? I know only one or two female comic, and that I have the pleasure of being friends with them, that don't talk about their lady parts on the stage. Everyone else is doing it, and it's built or seen as funny. But what is the subversion? They would subvert my expectations if they don't talk about their sex life and all that.
Subversive in 1950 maybe, but not today.
Yeah,
Time traveling subversive comedians, and
yeah,
I think
it is.
female comedian is an oxymoron as well. Like, so
Well, that's a whole other interesting debate to be had. But as we said earlier, now conservative or conservatism or Christianity, so many Christian. So many comics go on stage and say, "Is anybody Christian?" And in a room of 200 people, nobody raises their hand. And I guess maybe a few of them are Christian, but they don't dare raise their hands because they are likely to be picked on or whatever. I know only Alistair Williams and Nick Dixon. He doesn't do much stand-up nowadays because he has his own podcast and TV shows and all that. But these are the only openly Christian.
Oh, am I gone or is he gone? Oh.
So yeah, essentially, it's an exercise in box ticking and having a narrative in advance, and then going for the comics that tick those boxes and presenting it to the audience. The irony is that the lady you mentioned, I mean, she presumably comes from a former British colony, which is the reason she speaks English, which is the reason she is in the UK, and which is the reason. Imagine the irony of nagging and complaining about colonialism and racism in a comedy routine, which then incoronates you as the winner of the year, right? How racist these British must be for you to become part of their empire, marry, I don't know if her husband is a British person, but has certainly a British surname, and then you are in this country performing in this language of the former colonial powers and being awarded and rewarded for doing that. So that is the paradox, which is kind of mind-blowing, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we had previous Prime Minister in Ireland, Leo Varadkar. So father is Indian, mother is English, openly homosexual. and he browbeated the Irish people that we're not inclusive and we're racist. So within one generation, a homosexual Indian, like slash English person, can become the leader of Ireland,
Our
but we're not.
Lord Mayor as well.
Yeah, there's many cases. It's truly fucking bizarre. I wanted to move on to the Great Replacement theory. So I'm sure everybody gets very nervous when you talk about grand conspiracies like that, but really there's too many coincidences for it to be accidental. So do you get much of an opportunity? I listened to an interview you did with what's the name of those guys?
Trigonometry.
Yeah.
Don't ask me how to pronounce that.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned it briefly, but I think they kind of shut you down. Maybe they got nervous talking about it, or they were talking about, well, it's more nuanced than that. But you didn't really seem to get much of a chance to talk about it in any detail.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'm friends with both of them. Francis Foster, by the way, was my first comedy coach when I did a stand-up comedy
Oh,
course.
nice.
So yeah, we are friends, and that was a friendly interview, and I appreciated it. But the grand or the Great Replacement, which I mentioned, was the only topic maybe where I was challenged on that. And yes, we didn't go into depth about it, and sometimes, as you can imagine, on YouTube, I think in some of my videos where I have mentioned the great, I talked about it on a show called Headliners on GB News, where I'm sometimes invited as a panelist, and then I had put that clip on my YouTube channel, and then there was the blue what is it called? Extra information from courtesy of Wikipedia, I guess.
Oh, where they fact check you, is it? The
Yeah.
fact checking, yeah.
I mean, of course, if you want to look at it from a very, very strict sense of the term, yeah, I don't believe necessarily a bunch of politicians have got together in a secret room, rubbing their hands, and said, okay, how can we do that? I wouldn't be surprised if it has happened. But what we say, or what I mean by Great Replacement theory, which is again more than theory, if you look around, is that our governments and the global structures that supersede them, like the United Nations, the Migration Pact of the European Union, and the migration policy of the UN, they openly say that we need to facilitate and increase migration from this part of the world to the West. So it's just inevitable if you're a politician, and again, our governments have facilitated that. A few months ago, this was heralded and lauded as one of the achievements of the European Union, despite the protests of a couple of countries like Hungary and Poland, which I mentioned. Ever more immigration from one side of the world to the other side of the world, which is basically us, which is Europe and North America, maybe Australia. Together with that, we have policies, hard policies like economic policies, but also media indoctrination, which openly and actively discourage white people, white Europeans, from having children, from starting families. This can come either through economic policies, because it's obvious that one salary used to be enough, now even two is not enough. People can't buy houses, people can't have kids, people don't have kids, the statistics are there. And then, of course, you have a wave after wave of immigrants who get special treatments and get all the priority in terms of assigning social housing and all that. And then they outbreed us. In Italy, we have a saying, say, mathematics is not an opinion. We know if you look at the population of the countries on the southern side of the Mediterranean, they have doubled, if not more, over the past couple of decades. We know, and we know they outbreed us when they are in their own countries, and they outbreed us when they come to our countries. I mean, it's just go to any primary school in England or in Italy or in France and see what color people are. So this is the great replacement. So all they have to tell you that you are crazy or you are inaccurate is that yes, there hasn't been a conference where world leaders got together and say, okay, how can we uproot whites and turn them into a minority in their own homeland? Okay, presuming that has never happened, still that's what they're doing, isn't it?
Mm.
Our cities are beyond recognition, most of them. You know, just look at Amsterdam, look at Rotterdam. This is in the Netherlands. Look at Italy. Look at Milan. Look at East London. You go to East London, do you see? Do you think you see a lot of Cockneys nowadays?
The
No,
way
no,
I
sorry, you go.
sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
The way I kind of view this question is if you have one group who are dealing drugs in a neighborhood, another group stealing cars, another group's smashing windows, they might not necessarily be talking to each other, but they're turning that place into a dump. They're lowering, say, the property value of the area. So, land developers can come in, buy it up for, a good price for the locals, but cheap as chips for them, and gentrify the place. It may not necessarily be what we would traditionally call a conspiracy, but it's kind of working out that way. I think there's a few moving parts here that kind of somebody's getting something out of this.
And in case of our demographic replacement, I think it's even more than that, because the left does tell us openly that we need more immigration because we are not making enough babies. And then there is a counter argument to that, and people say, well, give us the means of making babies. It's not like, yes, part of it is that because you have brainwashed women into thinking that being a mother matters less than being somebody in a cubicle in a call center answering the phone and working, right? You have diminished the value of family and the value of somebody who's a homemaker and somebody who is, and you've done that. And well, we say feminism, but feminism actively pursued by governments as well. We have governments in Europe, like the Swedish government. They call themselves the feminist government, the first feminist government. We have candidates calling themselves feminist candidates. So it's not. It's again a policy actively pursued by the government and by TV channels and media that are financed by the government. Never mind that, we have political sides who say, look, the solution to this problem is that you give women the possibility of having children, but also, having the daycare, the kindergarten, facilitating tax breaks on people who get married or at least form some sort of family. Okay, so that is one way. It is not a given, and it is not inevitable that we need to replace our demographic deficit with people who come from overseas and culturally and in terms of values have nothing to do with us. Actually, quite worse, they are sometimes the antithesis and in conflict with our values, right? But our politicians, the ones who rule us, even the so-called conservatives who have betrayed us, in case of Britain, for example, they have chosen the other path, right? So as a politician, you know what the impact of your policies are. You know what the impact of your policies is. So So if you keep insisting at that, I can't help but think, this is by design and this is your intention.
Mm. So what do you think would convince somebody to go along with that? So we'll take it, right, that there is a conspiracy. We know there are many conspiracies. Most people conspire to get into some girl's knickers on a Friday night or buy drugs. So conspiracy is a fact of life. And we know throughout history, back to, Greek times and Roman times, that there's always been an elite who set the agenda for how society runs. And unfortunately, by and large, we need them. Like, just as much as we need the guy who works in the factory, we need, well-educated elites. Unfortunately, so we'll accept that. And maybe we accept that the green agenda is true, global warming is true. Just for the sake of argument, we'll accept it. And that, the world is in peril. And all these people in Africa and other continents, if we just leave them there, they're going to perish and die. So we have to help them, okay? But then what would convince somebody to accept the idea that it's a good idea to get rid of white Europeans? To my mind, it can only be really one of compliance. I think historically, Europeans are not the most compliant population on the planet. I look to China, Japan, Africa, and they seem very, very compliant populations, and the countries they come from, there's no questioning of authority, and especially with Islam, like we said, power is valued over truth and love. So I think from a top-down view, it would be much more convenient if populations were replaced with more compliant people. So do you have any thoughts around that? Like, why is it that they would want to replace Europeans with these other populations?
Compliance. To quote or paraphrase the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, if they take away our identity, it's easier to dominate us. For them, it would be easier to if everybody it becomes a number, becomes a consumer. That's the gist of what she says. And if you look at it, they are doing it on all fronts, right? It's not just an attack on religion, and by religion I mean Christianity, but also gender, but also nation state, nationality, even art and architecture, even standards of beauty. What do I mean by that? When a Christian church where you can have the rainbow flag and you have female priests celebrating gay or lesbian marriages, and then this has happened in England, at least Church of England, funny kind of church, isn't it? I go after Church of England often, and my wife said maybe next year we'll put our girls in Church of England school. Why? If they why? But when you give Church of England as a space to Muslims to pray, so this is a church which is no longer a church. It becomes arbitrary. It becomes a social construct. Somebody said they hollow it out and wear it as a trophy on their head. So that's the religion, and then gender has become totally arbitrary, and you can change it every other day as you please. And then borders, they don't want borders, obviously. Who is German? But who is Britain? We are a nation of immigrants, and the Vikings came and the Normans, and so that means anybody can be British and nobody can be British. Anybody can be German, nobody can be German. And again, in beauty, hashtag everybody is beautiful, right? Because we can't have standards for beauty, because inevitably, once we have standards, inevitably one group of people will be more beautiful, right? Because they fit those standards better than the other. So nobody's fat, but everybody should be body positive, and we can't call anybody fat, and everybody is beautiful. And again, with architecture, they're all for brutalism, because then when every city looks the same, then you are a citizen of everywhere, and you feel at home nowhere, and maybe everywhere. So then we are ready for the global governance. or the global government, the globalist project. I think this is part of the reason why our overlords are hell bent on replacing us. And of course, maybe not all of them are thinking in these terms. Some of them are. You can see the videos on YouTube or elsewhere. The German Green parliamentarian says, yeah, in 20 years, Germany or this city of Hamburg, I don't know which one, will not be majority German. Und das ist gut so. It's good. Some of them, some might open in their hate. Credit to them and credit to Muslims or Islamists. They say, we will replace you. We will conquer you using your laws and then rule on you using our laws. Some of them say this, and it's available to everybody. For those who want to see. But some other politicians may be a bit less explicit or less on board with the bigger design. But nonetheless, as I said, they actively encourage this. Maybe they, paint it under the guise of being compassionate, and they need us, and if neighboring territories to Europe are destabilized, it will have a ripple effect on our stability. So what is the solution? Let's bring all of them here. Of course, it's stupid, but some people do believe in that. Don't underestimate, again, the white guilt, the colonial guilt, whereby you think, okay, we have a lot, so we have to give, and of course they're stupid. This is another talking point that I need to turn into some funny bits. Women who predominantly vote for the left, and they then complain that they don't feel safe on our streets. But who did you vote for, and who is bringing in these people who look at you in a certain way and maybe touch you in a certain way, or maybe rape you? Statistics are there. No matter how much the media try to hide it or say, oh, well, these are just German national, French passport holder. Yeah, we know the statistics are there. We are voting for our own demise. Just I think last week, Elizabeth Warren in the U.S., former Democratic candidate for the presidential race in 2020, and the potential vice president candidate for Kamala Harris. Doesn't matter. She came and said, we need a path for citizenship. That's what they call it. For these 11 million people who came into the U.S. during the Biden-Harris administration. 11 million people, the ones we know of, came in during Biden-Harris. That's the population of, more than the population of, that's the population of a medium-sized European country like Austria or Switzerland or Hungary. It's the population of London. Anyway, so path for citizenship means these will, who will they vote? Republican or Democrat? The answer is obvious. So sometimes it might be short-term electoral gain, and that's already very alarming, isn't it? But there are those who say, no, white people are evil, and whiteness is evil, and the sooner we become all beige, gender fluid, borderless, consumer citizens, the easier we will be dominated. There's people who, order on Amazon and watch Netflix and post the rainbow flag of the NHS or the rainbow sign of the NHS or the Ukrainian flag or whatever the current thing is. So yeah, I think it's easier to get the compliance out of us.
Yeah. The bulwark against this seems to be Russia. I know people get very nervous when they talk about Russia, but perhaps an invasion by the Russians may be the saving grace. Yeah, it doesn't seem so bad at all. It would seem like a much better situation. So have you delved into that in your comedy? Anything around Russia or?
Yeah, I had a routine I think I published it a few weeks ago. I think this was my latest or the penultimate routine. And yeah, I go after. I talk about the war in Ukraine and Russia, and I raise the Russian talking points with which I essentially agree. You know, people said, "Oh, why did Tucker Carlson let Putin lecture him for half an hour about the history of Russia and Ukraine?" I think, yeah, maybe you needed the lecture, but because the lecture was
Yep.
spot on. At the end of the day, you can argue he shouldn't have resorted to violence, or, cross the border, international recognized border with tanks. But when they say this Ukrainian identity, if not made up, has been boosted artificially by the Soviet Union for certain political purposes, and lands gifted from this republic of this union to this republic. They did a lot of that. They did that with the Armenians, poor Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. But anyway, so yeah, I did a bit, and I said, how come? This is obviously I'm not redoing the bit, but
Sure.
essentially I said, if I want to extend my kitchen into my backyard, I have the council, the local authority, required me to get the consent of my next door neighbor. How come NATO can extend into Russia's backyard without the consent of Moscow, right? So that was my way of making this funny. And of course, some of my subscribers didn't like it. I said,
Oh.
this minus the Russia thing, or so now the Russians are the good guys. But at the end of the day, it doesn't have to be always right or 100% right. Sometimes you just point a view, or point out something or a new angle and say, hey, how about this angle? I sometimes make fun of the French in one bit, and then make fun of the Brits for making fun of the French. How dare you make fun of them? They're much cooler than you. So am I anti-French, pro-French? Who knows? I'm pro-life, but not necessarily pro-French or anti-French. I can have a bit of ambiguity on that area. So yeah, in a way, and I know this amounts to sacrilege or blasphemy, but in a way, thank God for Russia. And I don't approve of Russian foreign policy when it comes to, for example, what they did in Syria, because they're a staunch ally of the Islamic Republic, which is not good. But again, Russians have been betrayed by some betrayed promises of the West in terms of the NATO expansion and the whole demonization and the question that this is blatantly a double standard, that the U.S. would never accept Mexico or Cuba, for that matter, to enter a military alliance with a hostile, superpower next to its border. So why are we surprised that the Russians reacted the way they reacted? That's one thing. But to get back to your question, yes, we are desperate. Anyone who stands up for the values, traditional values, family, nation, Christianity, we got to give them a look and give them credit for what they do. They might not be perfect, and Russia is far from perfect. We have Viktor Orban in Hungary, Poland. This time around, again, the globalist guys are back in power, sadly. But yeah, it's in a way it is reassuring. And I don't know if you heard this story a while ago. The head of, I think it was the head of the army, the British Army, who said we need to look into the possibility of military service recruitment.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of people rightly were like, really? So who do you want to recruit? I suppose the white guys who you've been demonizing for decades now, suddenly you like us and you want us, because who else is going to? And then how can you, for decades, you say, well, who is British? Who is English? Everybody's British. Everybody's English. Borders don't matter, And then say, oh, let's take up arms and go die for these borders. That is That is not going to,
Good point.
sound. Who is ready to die? Because all these years, and again, that's a bit of a potential funny streak to examine. You look at the recruitment. I don't know if you have anything similar in Ireland, but you look at the recruitment ads for the British Army, Navy, the Royal Marines, the Royal Air Force, and there's nothing about patriotism. There's nothing about, come serve this flag, serve this country, UK number one. No, no, it's all about, yeah, come here and get a bunch of friends who have your back, and you go travel the world, and you will feel you will belong here. It's all from the selfish individual's point of view and interest. Just like you are advertising a commercial product, or any other job, but a job where you are armed and you could die defending your country is not an ordinary job. So suddenly we had this shift. Well, we haven't had this shift in terms of the advertising on TV, but we have had prominent military leaders talking about the possibility or the need of first of all modernizing and expanding the army or the military, and recruiting people, introducing military service, and all that, which is again thanks to Russia. So maybe we will rediscover some love for the fatherland thanks to the Russian threat. And by the way, Trump was ridiculed incessantly and profusely for having said that NATO should pay its fair share, and everybody was like, "What? How dare you?" And then the Ukraine war happened, and NATO rushed to manufacture armaments and because they didn't have enough stuff to help Ukraine with, and they were all short, and they had ghost stocks.
It's amazing.
That didn't yeah, and now they are, and British government has promised to reach that 2 or 2.5% GDP. So this is all. I don't want to, be insensitive towards the plight of people in Ukraine who are at war, but these are all positive collateral consequences of Russia and Russia's aggressive.
Yeah, we've had a recent recruitment campaign for Irish military and police as well, but it's nothing, like I said, it's nothing got to do with patriotism or anything like that. In fact, there's been a lowering of standards, so they're actively recruiting women and foreign nationals, and in the media there's been, I don't know, in the last 2 months maybe 6 or 7 persistent campaigns of attacking Irish military personnel for acts of violence against women. So what we've had, it used to be a case where you couldn't, silly things like you couldn't have tattoos in the guards, your hair had to be a certain length, you had to look a certain way and be professional and have a high standard. All those standards are now gone because they don't actively want, especially with police, they don't want police who can think. I don't think that's ever really been the case anyway, but they just want people who will follow orders and follow any orders. The same with the military. It seems like they're hollowing out the military. So if there is an actual attack within Ireland, not that we could do anything anyway because we don't have any armed forces to speak of, they're talking about buying some jets and increasing the Navy. And this is how ridiculous it is in Ireland. We have 3 ships in our Navy and not enough personnel in the Navy to actually sail the ships. So we had to buy a second-hand ship from New Zealand, and then when we got it here, we didn't have the Navy personnel to actually man the ship. So it seems a case of where the military in Ireland, it's not needed for any foreign adventures. It's really to keep a handle on the people in Ireland. And within Ireland, there will be an uprising. It's going to happen. There will be another civil war. It's going to be so bizarre because what will probably happen is 2 separate groups of Irish people will fight over the interests of foreigners. So we've one set of people who are, opposed to mass immigration, and then we have another set of society who is gung-ho, where the saying over here is, there's people say Ireland is full, which means that we don't have the capacity to essentially take in hundreds of thousands of people a year because it's having terrible effects on society economically. We don't have enough doctors, we don't have enough hospitals, we don't have enough schools, and that's what people mean when they say Ireland is full. Then we have people on the left saying Ireland is not full, which means well, there's land there. Therefore, as long as there's land, means you can bring people in and you don't need any sort of services to back it up. So unfortunately, what's going to happen, as I can see it, is that Irish people will have another civil war. Nothing to do with the benefit of Irish people. It will just be primarily over these foreign nationals who are coming in. And I think it's going to be the same in the UK. I don't think Russia's coming to help us. I don't think anybody's coming to help us. It's going to be contingent on people, firstly, to speak up. Because that's what I love about comedians, is that you guys do speak up. Like, you speak the truth. And that's terrifying under normal circumstances at your kitchen table at Christmas time, you know. But to be able to stand up in front of a crowd, and a lot of them a hostile crowd, and say it, that's what's needed first. A very simple thing. And I think Irish people have finally found that voice where they're saying, you know what, I don't fucking care anymore. I don't care if you think I'm a monster because I believe that it's wrong to kill an innocent life, to take a child's life in the womb. I don't care if you call me racist. I just don't, people don't fucking care anymore. And I think what's been lacking in Ireland, and probably the UK and much of Europe for the last 20, 30 years, is let's call it toxic masculinity, what it actually is to be a man. And I think that's why so many women disrespect men. It's not because we're monsters or because we're toxic men. It's the fact that we don't have any toxic, quote unquote, masculinity left. We're prepared to just go, okay, well, you know, we can't protect you. And if I know anything about women, it's that they don't respect men who can't protect them. So if we have all these foreign guys from incompatible cultures coming into the country and they're attacking our women, and we do what? Nothing. We just sit back and let them get raped, you know, let them get beheaded, let children get stabbed, and we've historically done absolutely nothing about it. How they respect that? And then these guys from a foreign culture, they will be, you know, subconsciously and biologically attracted to that, because at least they will be protected. And that may mean that you can't leave the house, you can't dress as you like, but on a deep subconscious level, they will feel protected. Granted, they may as well be prisoners. But I think that's what's been lacking in Western man for a long time, because it's how we've been educated, you know, for the last 20 or 30 years, from children through college, is that, you know, you must do everything in your power to subdue what it is to be a man. And there's never been a time in modern history where actually men need to re-engage with that and become men again and find that, it's terrible to say it, but to find that fucking warrior, that violence that's within every man, because it's there for a reason, you know. And the same with hate. Like we have the prospect of, you know, the most draconian hate speech bill in the world coming into Ireland to shut people up. But there's a reason to hate, and there's many things that need to be hated, and you need to, you know, embrace that fucking hate. Otherwise, we're all doomed. And it's tragic to say that, but I don't see another way out, really. And I think those who rule us are small in numbers. I think it's very easy for people to get frightened, to get terrified. Oh, how can we fight this enormous beast? But it's just made up of individual people. There may be a group of 300 or 400 men in darkened rooms, but it's your next door neighbor who, you know, enforces the policy. He's the fucking police officer. He's the army man. He's the guy in the tax office. He's the doctor. But I think that's where it's going to lie. It's great for me to see people in the UK finally get a voice and stand up, because I was convinced that they would just be steamrolled. And I think you're right, like you mentioned earlier, that they looked across to Ireland and saw Irish people rising up. Granted, it's not much of a rising. It's burning a couple of buildings, protests outside migrant centres. But that's what needs to happen initially. And it's probably going to be another 5 or 10 years of absolute fucking chaos. But to do nothing is just the road to nihilism, you know?
Even in France, top intelligence officials had warned the government that, you know, France is heading for civil war. And of course, they didn't heed the warnings. As you said, the disgraceful way in which Macron played the system to stop the patriots and the so-called far right from rightly winning, and now they are in a mess. I don't know if things will go worse. Hopefully not, but this is how you get civil war. Again, in the UK, we had this very controversial Rwanda scheme, which never actually took off, and of course, the new government immediately abandoned. If you cannot allow the people to deport those who don't deserve to be here, to deport the criminals, if you can't take criminals off the streets, then what choice do we have but heading for violence and civil war, right? If you look at the way they game the system or they rig the elections in the US, for example, what rigging an election doesn't necessarily mean stuffing fake ballots into the ballot box. And of course, the strong suspicion is there because all those so-called 3 a.m. morning ballots and, taking some ballot stations, polling stations, 9 days to count the votes. I mean, how come we've seen elections in the UK. I mean, you have a state of Arizona or Nevada, the population is a fraction of the UK population, and they're still counting, and they can't do an overnight shift. They have to go home, lock the place, and then come back and see. But never mind that. Okay, never mind the whole cheating at the election or on the election day, which you can't even call election day because they start 3 months earlier, and that is also ridiculous. But never mind that. When FBI goes and tells social media, do not publish the story of Hunter Biden because it's a Russia hoax, which turned out it was not a Russia hoax. When you type into Google Donald Trump and it says, do you want to donate to Kamala Harris campaign? Is this not rigging the system? They have everyone and they're all complicit in this, and they're all, again, in the UK, I mentioned the Rwanda case. We have 3 6-year-old kids murdered, and the prime minister is vilifying and demonizing the rioters, the same lovey-dovey who appreciate so much the BLM rioters or the ethnic rioters. Okay, so when they don't leave any channel for you through the democratic means, through the legal system, judiciary system, they are not prosecuted. If they're prosecuted, again, they are let loose. They're always known to the police. If he was known to the police, why was he out? Who's responsible? Who takes the blame? Why does no judge or parole officer lose their job for unleashing these murderers on our most defenseless people? So bottom line is, if you don't allow us to exercise our rights through democracy, then democracy will lose its legitimacy, and people no longer see the police or the military or the political leaders as their representatives, as their supporters, but we see you as the enemy. And the path is, look at my last example, I promise. European Union landslide for the so-called far right. That was in last month's parliamentary elections, right? So much so that it was so embarrassing for Macron that he had to call in early elections. Now, the new parliament comes in. The speaker of the parliament is the same as the previous one. And the head of the European Commission is again the same Ursula von der Leyen, the same globalists, the same WEF puppets. It's just more of the same, right? And obviously, as a pro Brexit person, I don't miss being a member of the EU, but this exactly goes to show you why we had to leave this undemocratic globalist project in the first place. But yes, ultimately it will come to violence. It's going to be either violence or the demise of the European white civilization, because they don't allow you any other channel or opportunity. In Germany, they are trying to ban AFD, Alternative for Deutschland. In France, they rigged the system. In Britain, they sabotage Brexit, and they are blaming those who've been indignant for the murder of the little girls rather than reviewing their policies of appeasement and mass migration. Every European country almost we have the same story, which ultimately just undermines democracy. And people will say, "Oh well, if all it takes is war, so be it," because it's about our existence.
Yeah, they're leaving people no other option. Really, on the political frontier, there's no alternative. We don't even have an opposition, so to speak of. If you vote the equivalent of Labour or Conservative here, it's pretty much it's the same party,
Yeah,
we have
and it doesn't matter what you vote in the UK, the same party is going to end up in charge. You know, like we only figured out. Well, myself and I'm sure a lot of Brits have only figured out how messed up your electoral system is when the guys that got the third highest amount of votes ended up with the most seats and running the government.
Yeah, that's first past the post. You see two parties, for a reform, which was a reaction to the two-party system dominated by fake conservatives who betrayed us for 13 years, and the Labour. Reform was the reaction, headed by Nigel Farage, right? They roughly gained, I think, 11 or 14% of the votes and 5 seats. And then we have Liberal Democrats who gained almost the same portion of the votes, but they gained, I don't know, I don't want to say a wrong figure, but many, many more seats. And this happened a while back ago in Brexit times. UKIP at that time had like 1 or 2 seats with 6 million votes, and then SNP in Scotland had the same 6 million votes, but about 60 something seats. This is how the first past the post system and these constituencies make voting in a way irrelevant. A lot of these seats are the so-called safe seats. So it doesn't matter how you vote, because your party will become second or third, and that vote is lost. The first guy who maybe gets 30% of the votes goes to Westminster, goes to the parliament. So again, and of course the upper house, the House of Lords, is totally unelected, and a bunch of buddies and political cronies. Basically every government who is in power, the prime minister can nominate a bunch of new peers, members of the House of Lords. And then even when like in case of Brexit, it happened, even when the House of Commons manages to approve something, ratify something, it goes to the House of Lords, and they are basically the deep state trying to throw a spanner into the wheel and stop it from going through. So that's another undemocratic aspect. But yes, the disappointment is real, because in a system where Labour is not distinguishable from Tories, Conservatives, and vice versa, we need a third party, but the third party struggles because of first past the post.
Okay, I think maybe we need to embrace Islam. We can infiltrate it if we get enough Christians to infiltrate Islam.
I had this little joke. I said, of course, this was, I think, in 2021 when the Taliban had just took power for the second time in Afghanistan. And I thought, yeah, I was very sad to see that and what it meant for, women and girls in Afghanistan. But then I saw a lady with a T-shirt saying, "I've had 21 abortions," and suddenly the Taliban don't seem that bad. When you see the degeneracy and the excesses of feminism and wokeism, for example, the whole abortion on demand and, men beating the hell out of women in Olympic boxing, you think, well, at least Iran will not be all that bad.
Yeah, and you could say why someone would travel for jihad, couldn't you? If you say this is the world, and if you don't put a stop to this there, it will come to the world of Islam as well. And the same with the Russians as well. Like Putin said it himself. Like it's not just a war; it's a cultural war. Like, why would you want that? Like, if that was your next door neighbor, like if your next door neighbor is this degenerate who kills unborn babies, has fucking sex with everybody. And what would you do? Like, you'd either move away as far as possible, or you would burn his house to the fucking ground. And it's unfortunate because that's not all the West. Like, I don't even know what percentage of the West that is. Like, in my personal life, I don't really know anybody. I know maybe one or two women who've had abortions, but I don't know, many trans people. It's got to be a handful of people, really. But it's the ideology that's,
it's a relativism. They have normalized the margins, right? The extremes. How many people think they are a man in a woman's body or a woman in a man's body and are really going to, bludgeon you for getting their pronouns wrong? How many women, even if you look at the Democratic Party, women in America, do you think the majority of them want abortion on demand up to the day of the birth and paid by taxpayer, no less? And that's why they call it, when they rebrand it, because sometimes they are ashamed, often they are ashamed of calling it with its name, that is abortion. They call it voluntary termination of pregnancy, right? Or women's reproductive health care. Yeah. When they bring in the super long euphemistic rebranding, that it's not something good, right? It can't be good. It's like Democratic People's Republic of Korea, right?
Yeah. You have to rebrand if there's something wrong,
Yeah, the longer the name and the nicer sounding the name, the more horrible the actual concept is. But I don't know. I was saddened when the abortion referendum passed in Ireland. I was looking at all these women, young, celebrating, and I was like, oh, well, that's maybe material for my abortion routine. But
yeah. Well, no, you spoke about elections being rigged. So we had, like, Ireland is, the Central European landing point for many multinationals, like the headquarters of Facebook is here, the headquarters of Google, TikTok, all here. And during that campaign, again, all of government was in favor of legalizing abortion, and the same with social media. You couldn't advertise if you were, anti-abortion. You couldn't get advertisement anywhere. It was essentially scrubbed from the internet everywhere in Ireland. Facebook took all the posts down. Google took all the posts down. So it was essentially rigged. It is a shame. Yeah, we won't get a chance to have unless we get a nationalist government. There won't be another referendum. It's not how it works, Granted, we at least have the option of referendums. You guys in the UK don't. But anything that affects our constitution, it has to go to the people. We recently had one around redefining what family means. Mm-hmm. And I was convinced that would go the same way. But thankfully, like 83% of the people decided not to change the constitution. They wanted to change the constitution from the definition of a family, which is, man, very simple, easy for people to understand, man, woman, child. They wanted to change that to, and marriage as well, to durable relationship. So if that had passed, it would have been that a marriage and a family constituted anybody who was in a durable relationship with no definition on durable. So theoretically, it could have been you and I. We declare that we're in a durable relationship, and then we have the same constitutional rights as a traditional Christian family.
They were also taking the woman. They were also taking woman out of the Constitution, which acknowledged that a woman has the right to not have to work. Imagine that. Like she has the right to stay at home and look after her family if she so chooses. And they try to frame that as, oh, it's saying that women have to stay home because, you know,
Mhm.
all of these enslaved women that we have here in Ireland. Um, so it was an omnibus uh, referenda, and there was only one constituency in the whole of the country out of what? How do we have like 300 of them or something? That
Mhm.
voted yes. The rest of the country voted no. It was the abortion referendum broke my heart. I've become an inconsolable alcoholic since. I just can't handle what's going on in the world since then. But this gave me a little bit of a lift, you know, like, yeah, you know what? Maybe things are gonna be okay if we have this much sense in the country. Because the Women's Council, is it called? An NGO in quotes for women, was coming out and saying, yeah, lads, ladies, sorry, yeah, ladies and lads, of course, we need to get this through for women. While the women of the country were the ones most on, like, you know, just in interpersonal relationships in real life or on social media, telling men, please go out there and vote no, this isn't in my interest.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
some hope.
when Hillary didn't manage to win against Trump, and she blamed women, and I had a little joke because her book was called. She wrote a book about it, and the book was called "What Happened." And New York Times said this is a feminist manifesto. And in the book, she blamed white women. Said white women were influenced by male members of the family.
That's not a joke. Like you weren't joking completely.
No, 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 no. That was her
Oh
argument.
my
No, so the
god.
joke was the joke was that the punchline when I say, don't you hate it when a feminist candidate cannot smash the glass ceiling because of millions of stupid women standing in her way? So basically, she blamed white women for not having voted for her. And why not? Not because she found her incompetent or, unpleasant, but because they listened to male. They were too impressionable. That was the gist of it by the male members of the family. But um, um, the the madness. You talked about the definition of the family. This happened. I want to give you an example that I came across just this week. I mentioned the Taliban in Afghanistan. They've come back to power. Um, for a whole generation of women in their 20s and 30s who didn't live or remember the first government of the Taliban in the 90s. All of a sudden, they are essentially under house arrest. They can't work, they can't go to high school, and all that. And of course, campaigners from Afghanistan and elsewhere say, look, this what the Taliban is doing is gender apartheid. So let us codify the concept of gender apartheid, just like we did racial apartheid in case of South Africa. So we can, hold the Taliban accountable, impose sanctions, take them to international tribunals, whatever.
Mm.
Which sounds a straightforward um, proposition, right? Now, what is the problem? How I want to give you this as an example of how this whole relativism, and woke madness can backfire on the most vulnerable that they are presumably supposed to defend. There is a body of the UN General Assembly. I think it's called the Sixth Committee. Doesn't matter. They are working on a draft of a new international treaty about human rights, and that is presumably where the concept of gender apartheid can be codified, to go after the bad Taliban and make them accountable. However, because of wokeism, they cannot define gender. So they they cannot define gender, or they haven't managed to find the unanimity to define gender based on, the old man-woman concept.
Mm-hmm.
So because there are forces who want to bring in the gender, the fluid gender, the social construct, the gender that can be 35 or whatever number it is at this minute, all right, that has caused resistance, and rightly so, because there are other countries or parties who say, look, we are fine with gender apartheid, meaning oppressing and suppressing women like the Taliban are doing. But if you go for gender apartheid, in which gender can be anything and everything, then we are going to be in trouble, because then we will be prosecuted for not allowing gender number 35 to work in a, I don't know, religious school, or be hired to work with kids. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So, perfect example of how something which should have been clear cut and totally straightforward to help the actual oppressed gender in Afghanistan has been um, sabotaged or hindered by the woke ideology madness, by the gender ideology madness. And I understand I understand the position of those who are concerned about this, because, as I said, when gender is beyond man and woman, then I don't know, maybe I have a kindergarten and I want a lady or a man to work with my kids, and then somebody comes in and says, no, I identify as, a bus.
Yeah, I
And
don't
that's
know. Maybe there's a saving grace for Afghani women if they identify as men and they can't be oppressed in the house as a woman. Like so.
Yeah, except that the Taliban doesn't believe in that fluidity, right? The Taliban don't believe that gender is assigned to you at birth, and then maybe it was misassigned.
Yeah. So
So,
yeah, I think the woke need to go where they're needed. I don't think they're really needed in the West anymore. So if they were true to their word,
yeah, I mean, again, that is a sad story of feminism. All the time when feminism could have or should have defended the real oppressed sisters, they were worried about why this female presenter at the BBC is not paid as much as this male presenter at the BBC. You know, well, if this female presenter at the BBC thinks she's worth more, she can join another channel, and then we will see how many people switch on their TVs. You know, footballers or tennis players. How many football fans do you know who are willing to pay £60, I don't know, 50 euros for the T-shirt of a female football player, right? So it's not same pay for same job, because it's not the same job. Because, well, we are doing a podcast, all right? With all due respect, this is not Joe Rogan's podcast, right? It doesn't generate the same amount. Hopefully one day this will, but that's the point. It's not the same job, okay? But instead of defending the really oppressed, they were all about, yeah, why male footballers are paid more than female footballers, and why James Bond is not a lady, and all that stuff.
yeah, it's a nonsense.
Uh,
Do you have any plans to tour in the Persian world? Would your comedy go down well? Is that something you've considered? I think it would. Like I think it would probably go down well over there, or even Ireland. Like I don't think have you toured in Ireland or you've never
No,
saw.
I've never been to Ireland, actually. Yeah, I think Ireland would be more plausible than the Persian speaking one. Uh, yeah. I was in Canada about 2 months ago, which that was nice. I did a 1 hour show for the first time in Ontario, but these were people who were connected to the truckers movement in Canada. And I say, thank God for the internet and social media, at least the ones who are more open-minded, because we need to connect and be inspired. we can be inspired by the riots in Ireland, but also by the truckers movement in Canada, by the farmers movement in France or in the Netherlands, and what by the border forces of Poland, and so on. So I just need to think of, yes, new places to go to, and I'd love to go to other places and to Ireland.
Yeah, there's definitely an audience. I know nothing about the comedy world, so I wouldn't know who to put you in touch with. I'm sure you could figure it out yourself. But there's definitely an audience. I think for any movement, there has to be a cultural movement that goes with it as well. And that seems to be a distinct lack of laughter on the left and music. You look at the 60s, like it was a great time, a great cultural movement as well. You can say whatever you want about the outcome of it. But I think on the right as well, there is a lack of a cultural movement of any sort of joy or happiness that's associated with it. But I definitely think there's a massive audience there. Again, I'm sure the Irish comedy world is pretty much like the UK one. It's just riddled with wokeness, and you may have difficulty there. But if we hear of any festivals coming up or events like that, we'll be sure to fire you across. We'll see if we can get some money. We wouldn't, you've done this for nothing, so we wouldn't expect you to come over to Ireland on your own penny, so to speak. And so we'll definitely look into that, see if we can arrange something, because it would be great to see the likes of you over here and for Irish people to experience a real comedian. So thank you for coming on, gracing us with your presence. It's very much appreciated, and we hope to have you back on, and continued success. You can tell people where to find you, but it's fairly easy. Just type in Nicholas De Santo, and everything will come up. And hopefully we get to see you in Ireland, and we'll even buy tickets. We won't hit you up for free tickets or anything like that.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Yes, they can simply type in Nicholas De Santo. My YouTube channel or Rumble, the same. It's called Anglo-Italian Comedy. And I'm on Twitter, Nico_De Santo. It was a pleasure talking to you guys, and hopefully I'll see you maybe in person one day in Ireland. And best of luck. Let's keep up the good fight.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And if I may, thank you for the laughs over the years, because this is my hobby, but I'm very serious about it, and that requires me watching the news and keeping up to date with everything, and it's all so depressing. And you guys at Comedy Unleashed, and yourself in particular, gave me a lovely relieving laughs. This is what it's about, is elevating us and getting us to think, as well as to just relax and enjoy life. And thank you very much for your service in that way.
Oh, thank you. Very, very kind. Yes, it's the, initially you say it's the bitter pill that you need to take. So what else? What better way than to take it with laughter? It's liberating. It's relieving, and it also gives you food for thought. So that's why I also have this occasional episodes. I call them fake news with Nicholas De Santo. So I have my own satirical news bulletin, which I treat the news items, news stories of the week or the month. So that's something that draws onto my my background as a journalist. That's the whoever can contribute with whatever means they have, they should do it, so that at least we didn't go down without a fight. Hopefully we will, but certainly we won't go down without a fight.
No, and we can talk about it wherever we land up. If there is something after this, we can meet up there and talk about it. Say, yeah, you did something too. Well done. Like, we could point down like Thomas Aquinas and laugh at all those fuckers who are roasting in hell.
Yeah, maybe hiding somewhere in Hungary as political refugees or whatever.
Maybe. All right, man.
God bless.
Thank you, Nicholas. It's very much appreciated. God bless.
Thank you. Have a good weekend. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.